The revelation came during a moment I'll never forget, standing on stage at a prophecy conference, about to speak to thousands about the signs of the times. But what Jesus revealed to me about the 3 final warnings before the rapture will shake you to your core, because these warnings have nothing to do with world events or prophetic signs, and everything to do with something happening inside the church right now that almost no one is recognizing. And what makes these warnings so critical is that missing even one of them could cost you everything, not because God is harsh, but because these warnings are your last chance to prepare for what's coming. But before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now let's get into my story. So, I was backstage at this massive prophecy conference in Dallas. There were like 8,000 people in the arena, all there to hear about the rapture, the tribulation, the signs of the end times. I had been invited to speak about recognizing the season of Christ's return, and I had my notes prepared, my PowerPoint ready, all the usual stuff about wars and rumors of wars, Israel, technology, all the signs everyone expects to hear about. But as I stood there waiting to go on, I felt this. I don't know how to describe it. It was like this weight pressing down on my chest, this sense that I was about to tell people what they wanted to hear instead of what they needed to hear. And I found myself praying, just whispering under my breath, Jesus, are these really the signs you want me to talk about? Are these really the warnings people need to hear? And then the stage manager was motioning me forward, the music was swelling, and I walked out onto that stage with my prepared notes in my hand. But as I looked out at those 8,000 faces, all eager, all expectant, all waiting to hear about prophetic signs, something happened that I can only describe as a complete disruption of reality. The arena didn't disappear. The people didn't vanish. But suddenly I was experiencing 2 realities at once. I was standing on that stage with a microphone in my hand, but I was also in the presence of Jesus, and his expression was urgent in a way I had never seen before. Jonathan, he said, and his voice cut through everything. The music, the crowd noise, my own thoughts. Don't give them what they expect. Give them what they need. The signs they're looking for in the world are not the warnings I'm giving. The 3 final warnings before the rapture are happening right now, inside the church, and almost no one is recognizing them. My hands started shaking. I was still standing on that stage, the audience waiting for me to speak, but I was also hearing Jesus tell me that everything I had prepared was wrong. The 3 final warnings, he continued, are not about world events. They're not about technology or politics or natural disasters. They're about what's happening to my people right now, 3 specific things that are your last chance to prepare before I return. And missing even one of these warnings could cost everything. So I'm standing there on this stage, and I put down my notes. I didn't even look at my PowerPoint. I just started speaking what Jesus was showing me in that moment, and I could see the confusion on people's faces because this wasn't what they had come to hear. I was going to talk to you about the signs of the times, I said, my voice shaking. I was going to show you charts and timelines and prophetic fulfillments. But Jesus just told me that's not what you need to hear. He said there are 3 final warnings before the rapture, and they're not about what's happening in the world, they're about what's happening in the church. And we're missing them. The arena got really quiet. I could feel the tension, the confusion, maybe even some anger from people who had paid to hear about prophecy and were getting something completely different. But I kept going because Jesus was showing me things in real time, and I knew I had to share them even if it cost me my reputation, my platform, everything. The first warning, I said, and I was literally seeing this as I spoke, is what Jesus calls the warning of comfort. Right now, in this moment, the church is more comfortable than it's ever been in history. And Jesus is saying that this comfort is not a blessing, it's a warning. It's your final warning to choose discomfort, to choose the cost of discipleship before it's too late. I watched as this truth landed on the audience, and I could see different reactions. Some people were leaning forward, suddenly alert. Others were crossing their arms, clearly not happy with what they were hearing. But Jesus kept showing me more. Look around you, I said, and I was seeing what Jesus was showing me, the comfortable Christianity that had infected the American church. We have church buildings that look like entertainment venues. We have services that are designed for comfort rather than conviction. We have messages that make us feel good rather than call us to die to ourselves. And Jesus is saying, this comfort is your final warning. Because, I continued, my voice getting stronger as the vision intensified, when the tribulation comes, when following Christ actually costs you something, this comfortable Christianity is going to collapse. And everyone who has built their faith on comfort rather than on Christ is going to fall away. The comfort you're experiencing right now is not God's blessing, it's God's final warning to prepare for the cost that's coming. I could see people starting to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the encouraging prophecy message they had expected, but Jesus wasn't done showing me things. The second warning, I said, and I was seeing this with such clarity it was like watching a movie, is what Jesus calls the warning of distraction. Right now, the church is more distracted than it's ever been. Distracted by politics, by culture wars, by secondary issues. And Jesus is saying that this distraction is not accidental, it's a final warning to refocus on what actually matters before the rapture occurs. And Jesus was showing me how this played out across the church. Believers who were more passionate about their political positions than about their relationship with Christ. Churches that spent more time addressing cultural issues than making disciples. Christians who could debate theology for hours but who never spent time in genuine prayer or worship. We're arguing about things that won't matter in eternity, I said, and I could feel the weight of this truth. We're fighting battles that are distracting us from the one thing that matters, being ready for Christ's return. And Jesus is saying this distraction is your final warning to refocus before it's too late. I paused, and in that pause Jesus showed me something that made my blood run cold. He showed me what would happen to believers who missed these warnings, and it wasn't that they would lose their salvation, but they would miss the rapture. They would be left behind, not because they weren't saved, but because they weren't ready. The third warning, I said, and my voice was barely above a whisper now, but the arena was so quiet that everyone could hear, is what Jesus calls the warning of self-deception. Right now, more Christians than ever before are deceiving themselves about their spiritual condition. They think they're ready for the rapture because they attend church, because they believe the right things, because they're good people. But Jesus is saying, this self-deception is your final warning to examine yourself honestly before I return. And Jesus was showing me believers across the world who were absolutely confident in their readiness for the rapture, but whose confidence was built on false foundations. They had prayed a prayer years ago and assumed that guaranteed their place in the rapture. They attended church regularly and thought that proved they were ready. They believed correct doctrine and assumed that was sufficient. But Jesus is saying, I continued, and I could feel tears starting to stream down my face, that many who think they're ready are not ready at all. Many who are confident they'll be raptured are going to be left behind. And this self-deception, this false confidence, is your final warning to examine yourself honestly, to test whether you're actually ready or just think you're ready. The arena was completely silent now. I could see people crying, people with their heads in their hands, people who looked angry, people who looked terrified. This was not the comfortable prophecy conference they had signed up for. These three warnings, I said, and Jesus was still showing me things, still revealing truths that I knew would be controversial but that I had to share, are happening right now. The comfort you're experiencing is a warning. The distraction you're caught up in is a warning. The self-deception you're living under is a warning. And Jesus is saying that these are your final warnings, your last chance to prepare before the rapture occurs. I stood there on that stage, and I knew I had just destroyed my reputation in the prophecy community. I had been invited to give a comfortable message about signs in the world, and instead I had delivered an uncomfortable message about warnings in the church. But I also knew that what I had shared was true, because Jesus had shown it to me in real time. As I walked off that stage to scattered applause and a lot of confused silence, I felt Jesus' presence intensify rather than fade. And he said something that would haunt me for, what you just shared will cost you. Many will reject this message because it makes them uncomfortable. But some will hear it, and for them, it could be the difference between being ready and being left behind. That night, back in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying what had happened, kept seeing the faces of those 8,000 people, kept wondering if I had done the right thing. And at exactly 3:33 a.m. I remember the time because of its significance, my room filled with that overwhelming presence again. Tomorrow night, Jesus said, I'm going to show you why these three warnings are the final warnings. I'm going to reveal what happens to believers who miss them, and why recognizing these warnings now is the difference between being raptured and being left behind. But before the presence faded, he said something that made my heart stop. The reason these are the final warnings is that they're the last opportunity for believers to move from comfortable Christianity to costly discipleship, from distracted faith to focused devotion, from self-deception to honest self-examination. After these warnings, there are no more warnings. After this, there's only the rapture and the devastating discovery of who was ready and who was not. As I lay there in the darkness, I realized that Jesus had just revealed something the prophecy community had completely missed. We had been teaching people to watch for signs in the world wars, earthquakes, technology, political developments. But Jesus was saying that the real signs, the final warnings, were happening inside the church, and we were missing them because we were looking in the wrong direction. The question that kept me awake the rest of that night was both personal and universal. If these three warnings, comfort, distraction, and self-deception, are the final warnings before the rapture, then how many believers are missing them? How many people who think they're ready are actually living under these warnings without recognizing them? And how many will be devastated when they discover too late that they missed their final chance to prepare? I knew that tomorrow night's vision was going to show me why these warnings were so critical and why missing even one of them could cost everything. And honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready to see it. The second night brought revelations that exposed why these three warnings, comfort, distraction, and self-deception, are the final warnings before the rapture and what happens to believers who miss them. After that chaotic prophecy conference where Jesus had completely redirected my message, I spent the entire day dealing with the fallout, angry emails, confused phone calls, and a growing sense that I had just burned every bridge in the prophecy community. What Jesus would show me about why these warnings are so critical would prove that the cost of missing them is far greater than anyone realizes. So, that whole day was it was brutal. The conference organizers were furious. They said I had gone off script, that I had upset people, that I had turned a prophecy conference into a guilt trip. One pastor actually called me and said, "People come to prophecy conferences to be encouraged about the rapture, not to be told they're not ready for it." And I kept thinking, but what if they're not ready? What if Jesus is right and we've been giving people false confidence by focusing on world events while ignoring the warnings happening inside the church? At exactly 3:33 a.m., same time as the night before, my hotel room filled with that overwhelming presence again. Jesus was there, and his expression carried this mixture of urgency and sorrow, like a parent trying to warn a child about danger that the child refuses to see. "Tonight," he said, and his voice had this quality of both patience and desperation, "I'm going to show you why these three warnings are the final warnings. I'm going to reveal what happens to believers who miss them, and why recognizing these warnings now is literally the difference between being raptured and being left behind." The room dissolved, and I found myself in this place where it was like I could see the timeline leading up to the rapture, and I could see believers at different stages of responding or not responding to these three warnings. And Jesus was about to show me why missing even one of them was so devastating. The first warning, the warning of comfort, is final because it's your last opportunity to choose costly discipleship before the cost becomes unavoidable, Jesus explained. Right now, you can choose discomfort voluntarily, but if you miss this warning, the tribulation will force discomfort upon you, and many who could have been ready will not be. So he showed me what this looked like. I could see believers who were living in comfortable Christianity, nice churches, encouraging messages, lives that required no real sacrifice. And Jesus was showing them this comfort as a warning. This ease you're experiencing is not normal Christianity. This comfort is not what I promised. I promised you would face tribulation, that following me would cost you everything. This comfort is your warning to prepare for the cost that's coming. But I watched as most of these believers ignored the warning. They interpreted their comfort as God's blessing rather than as God's warning. They thought their easy Christianity was proof that they were in God's favor, when actually it was their final opportunity to choose the hard path before the hard path became unavoidable. "Look at this man," Jesus said, showing me someone I'll call David. He was a successful businessman, a faithful church member, living a comfortable Christian life. And Jesus was warning him through his very comfort. This ease is not sustainable. This comfort is not preparing you for what's coming. Choose the cost now while it's still a choice. But David didn't recognize the warning. He thought his comfortable life was God's blessing, so he stayed comfortable. He never chose to sacrifice, never chose to suffer for Christ, never chose the costly path of discipleship. And when the rapture came, I watched this happen in the vision. David was left behind, not because he wasn't saved, but because his soul had never been prepared for the cost that readiness required. This is why the warning of comfort is final, Jesus explained, and I could hear the grief in his voice. It's your last chance to choose discomfort voluntarily, to prepare your soul for costly discipleship before the cost becomes unavoidable. Those who miss this warning will face the cost anyway during the tribulation, but they'll face it unprepared, and many will fall away. The second warning was even more urgent. The second warning, the warning of distraction, is final because it's your last opportunity to refocus on what matters before the rapture reveals what actually mattered. Jesus continued, "Right now you can choose to refocus, but if you miss this warning, you'll discover at the rapture that you spent your final days focused on things that didn't matter at all." So he showed me believers who were consumed with distractions, political battles, culture wars, theological debates about secondary issues, arguments about things that wouldn't matter in eternity. And Jesus was warning them through their very distraction. What you're focused on right now is not what matters. You're spending your final days arguing about things that won't determine your readiness. Refocus now, before it's too late. But I watched as most of these believers ignored the warning. They were so convinced that their political positions mattered, that their cultural battles were important, that their theological debates were crucial, that they never heard Jesus saying, "None of this is preparing you for my return." Observe this woman, Jesus said, showing me someone I'll call Rachel. She was passionate about politics, constantly posting on social media about cultural issues, spending hours every day engaged in debates about things that Jesus was showing me were completely irrelevant to her readiness for the rapture. And Jesus was warning her through her very distraction. You're spending your final days focused on things that won't matter when I return. You're pouring your energy into battles that won't determine your eternal destiny. Refocus on me, on transformation, on becoming ready. But Rachel didn't recognize the warning. She thought her political passion was righteous, that her cultural engagement was important, that her theological debates were necessary. So she stayed distracted right up until the moment of the rapture. And when Jesus returned, I watched this in the vision. Rachel was left behind, not because she wasn't saved, but because she had spent her final opportunity for preparation, focused on things that didn't prepare her at all. This is why the warning of distraction is final. Jesus explained, "It's your last chance to refocus on what actually matters, on relationship with me, on transformation, on becoming ready." Those who miss this warning will discover at the rapture that they wasted their final opportunity focused on distractions. The third warning was the most devastating of all. The third warning, the warning of self-deception, is final because it's your last opportunity to see yourself honestly before the rapture reveals the truth about your spiritual condition. Jesus said, his voice now carrying the weight of ultimate seriousness, "Right now, you can examine yourself honestly and discover whether you're ready or just think you're ready. But if you miss this warning, the rapture will reveal the truth, and for many, that revelation will be devastating." So he showed me believers who were living under self-deception, absolutely confident in their readiness for the rapture, but whose confidence was built on false foundations. They had prayed a prayer, they attended church, they believed correct doctrine, they lived moral lives, and they were certain this meant they were ready. But Jesus was warning them through their very confidence, your assurance is false. You're basing your readiness on things that don't actually prove you're ready. Examine yourself honestly now, before the rapture reveals the truth. I watched as most of these believers ignored the warning. They were so confident in their readiness that they never questioned it, never examined themselves honestly, never tested whether their assurance was based on truth or on self-deception. "Look at this pastor," Jesus said, showing me someone I'll call Michael. He had been in ministry for 30 years, had led thousands to Christ, was respected throughout his denomination, and he was absolutely confident he would be among the first raptured. But Jesus was warning him through his very confidence. Your assurance is based on your ministry success, not on your spiritual condition. You're confident because of what you've done for me. not because of what I've done in you. Examine yourself honestly before it's too late. But Michael didn't recognize the warning. He thought his ministry success proved his readiness, that his years of service guaranteed his place in the rapture. So he never examined himself honestly, never questioned his assurance, never tested whether he was actually ready or just thought he was ready. And when the rapture came, I watched this happen, and it was one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen. Michael was left behind. This pastor who had taught thousands about the rapture, who had written books about being ready, who had been absolutely confident in his own readiness, was standing on the ground watching others ascend, his face showing the devastating realization that his confidence had been false. This is why the warning of self-deception is final, Jesus explained, and I could hear the profound sorrow in his voice. It's your last chance to see yourself honestly, to test your assurance, to discover whether you're ready or just think you're ready. Those who miss this warning will have the truth revealed at the rapture, and for many, that revelation will be the most devastating moment of their existence. As Jesus showed me these 3 warnings and what happened to believers who missed them, a pattern began to emerge that was both clear and terrifying. These warnings were final not because God was being harsh, but because they represented the last opportunity for believers to prepare before preparation was no longer possible. But Jesus, I said, my voice shaking, why are these the final warnings? Why isn't there more time? Why can't people prepare during the tribulation? And Jesus looked at me with this expression of both love and seriousness, and he said something that made my heart stop. Jonathan, these are the final warnings, because they address the 3 things that determine readiness: willingness to pay the cost, focus on what matters, and honest self-examination. If believers miss these warnings, if they remain comfortable, distracted, and self-deceived right up until the rapture, then they're not ready, and the tribulation will force them to face what they refuse to face voluntarily. The believers who miss these warnings, he continued, will still be saved. They'll still go to heaven eventually, but they'll miss the rapture because they missed their final opportunity to prepare. They chose comfort over cost, distraction over focus, self-deception over honest examination, and that choice will cost them everything, not their salvation, but their readiness. I watched as Jesus showed me the moment of the rapture, and I could see the devastating realization on the faces of believers who had missed the warnings. They had been comfortable right up until the moment when comfort ended. They had been distracted right up until the moment when their distractions were revealed as worthless. They had been self-deceived right up until the moment when the truth was revealed. And the most heartbreaking aspect was that they had been warned. Jesus had been warning them through their very comfort, through their very distraction, through their very self-deception. But they hadn't recognized the warnings because they were looking for warnings in the world rather than warnings in their own hearts. Tomorrow night, Jesus said as the vision began to fade, I'm going to show you how to recognize these warnings in your own life and what you must do to respond to them before it's too late. I'm going to reveal the specific steps that move you from missing the warnings to heeding them, from being unprepared to being ready. But before the vision ended completely, he said something that would haunt me until our next encounter. The tragedy of these final warnings is that they're so obvious once you recognize them, but so easy to miss if you're looking in the wrong direction. Believers are watching for signs in the world while missing the warnings in their own hearts. And that misplaced focus is going to cost millions of them everything. As I found myself back in my hotel room, the weight of what Jesus had revealed pressed down on me with crushing force. The 3 final warnings, comfort, distraction, and self-deception, were happening right now, in this moment, to believers across the world. And most of them were missing the warnings because they were looking for signs in world events rather than examining their own spiritual condition. I thought about that prophecy conference, about those 8,000 people who had come to hear about wars and technology and political developments. They wanted to know about signs in the world, but Jesus was saying the real signs were in the church, in their comfort, in their distractions, in their self-deception. And I realized that the angry emails and confused phone calls I had received weren't just people disagreeing with my message, they were people missing the warning. They were so focused on looking for signs in the world that they couldn't see the warnings in their own hearts. The question that consumed me was both urgent and personal. How many believers are missing these 3 final warnings right now? How many are comfortable when they should be choosing cost? How many are distracted when they should be focused? How many are self-deceived when they should be honestly examining themselves? And how many will discover at the rapture that they missed their final chance to prepare? The third night brought the revelation that could save millions from missing the rapture. After Jesus showed me why these 3 warnings are final and what happens to believers who miss them, I spent the entire day in a state of desperate urgency, knowing that tonight He would show me how to recognize these warnings in my own life and what I needed to do to respond before it was too late. What Jesus would reveal about recognizing and responding to these warnings would prove both more challenging and more achievable than I had imagined. So, that whole day I was a wreck, honestly. I kept thinking about all those believers Jesus had shown me who missed the warnings: David who stayed comfortable, Rachel who stayed distracted, Michael who stayed self-deceived. And I kept asking myself, am I missing the warnings too? Am I comfortable when I should be choosing cost? Am I distracted when I should be focused? Am I self-deceived when I should be examining myself honestly? I tried to pray, but I couldn't focus. I tried to read scripture, but the words wouldn't sink in. I was so consumed with the question, how do I recognize these warnings in my own life? And more importantly, what do I do about them? At exactly 3:33 a.m., same time as the previous nights, my hotel room filled with that overwhelming presence again. But this time, Jesus' expression was different. There was still urgency there, but there was also this sense of hope, like He was finally going to reveal the solution to a problem that had been causing unnecessary devastation. Tonight, He said, and His voice carried both authority and compassion, I'm going to show you how to recognize these 3 warnings in your own life, and what you must do to respond to them before the rapture occurs. What I'm about to reveal is not complicated, but it will cost you everything you've been holding on to. The room dissolved, and I found myself in this place where I could see believers who were learning to recognize and respond to the warnings, and Jesus was about to show me the specific steps that moved them from being unprepared to being ready. The first step to recognizing the warning of comfort, Jesus explained, is to ask yourself one honest question: what has following me actually cost me? If the answer is nothing or very little, then you're living under the warning of comfort, and you need to respond before it's too late. So He showed me a believer, I'll call her Jennifer, who had been living in comfortable Christianity for years. Nice church, encouraging messages, a life that required no real sacrifice. But one day, she asked herself that honest question: what has following Jesus actually cost me? And the answer devastated her. It had cost her nothing. She attended church, but it was convenient and comfortable. She gave money, but only what she could easily afford. She served, but only in ways that fit her schedule and preferences. She had never sacrificed anything significant for Christ, never suffered for His name, never chosen the costly path of discipleship. This is the warning of comfort. Jesus said to her in the vision, your ease is not blessing, it's warning. Your comfortable Christianity is your final opportunity to choose the cost before the martyrdom. Cost is forced upon you. And I watched as Jennifer responded to the warning. She didn't just feel bad about her comfortable Christianity, she actually did something about it. She started making choices that cost her something. She began serving in ways that were inconvenient and uncomfortable. She gave sacrificially, not just conveniently. She spoke truth even when it cost her relationships. She chose the narrow path even when the broad path was easier. This is how you respond to the warning of comfort, Jesus explained. You deliberately choose discomfort. You intentionally pursue the costly path. You make decisions that require sacrifice, not to earn salvation, but to prepare your soul for the cost that readiness requires. The second step addressed the warning of distraction. The second step to recognizing the warning of distraction, Jesus continued, is to examine what you're actually spending your time, energy, and passion on. If you're more passionate about politics than prayer, more engaged with culture wars than with Christ, more focused on secondary issues than on your own transformation, then you're living under the warning of distraction. So He showed me a believer, I'll call him Marcus, who had been consumed with political and cultural battles. He spent hours every day on social media, arguing about issues, defending his positions, engaging in debates. He was passionate, engaged, and absolutely convinced that what he was doing mattered. But one day, he asked himself an honest question. If Jesus returned today, Would he care about any of the things I've been so passionate about? And the answer shook him to his core. No. Jesus wouldn't care about his political positions, his cultural battles, his theological debates about secondary issues. None of it would matter at all. This is the warning of distraction, Jesus said to him. Your focus on things that don't matter is your final opportunity to refocus on what does matter before the rapture reveals what actually mattered. And I watched as Marcus responded to the warning. He didn't just feel guilty about his distractions, he actually changed his focus. He drastically reduced his social media time. He stopped engaging in political arguments. He redirected his passion from cultural battles to personal transformation. He started spending the time he had been wasting on distractions pursuing intimacy with Christ instead. This is how you respond to the warning of distraction, Jesus explained. You ruthlessly eliminate distractions. You redirect your passion from things that don't matter to the one thing that does matter, becoming ready for my return. You stop arguing about politics and start pursuing transformation. The third step was the most challenging of all. The third step to recognizing the warning of self-deception, Jesus said, his voice taking on particular intensity, is to test your assurance honestly. Don't ask, am I saved? Ask, am I ready? And don't base your answer on prayers you've prayed or beliefs you hold or activities you do. Base your answer on evidence of transformation in your life. So he showed me a believer, I'll call her Sarah, who had been absolutely confident in her readiness for the rapture. She had prayed the sinner's prayer, she attended church faithfully, she believed correct doctrine, she lived a moral life. She was certain she was ready. But one day, she asked herself an honest question. Is there actual evidence of transformation in my life? Am I becoming more like Christ? And when she examined her life honestly, she was devastated to discover that the answer was no. She was the same person she had been 10 years ago. Same attitudes, same priorities, same character. She had religious activity, but she didn't have transformation. This is the warning of self-deception, Jesus said to her. Your false confidence is your final opportunity to examine yourself honestly before the rapture reveals the rapture truth about your spiritual condition. And I watched as Sarah responded to the warning. She didn't just feel bad about her lack of transformation, she actually pursued genuine change. She stopped relying on past prayers and started pursuing present relationship. She stopped measuring her readiness by religious activity and started measuring it by evidence of transformation. She stopped being satisfied with comfortable Christianity and started pursuing costly discipleship. This is how you respond to the warning of self-deception, Jesus explained. You examine yourself honestly, without excuses or self-justification. You test whether you're actually ready or just think you're ready. You look for evidence of transformation, not just evidence of religious activity. As Jesus revealed these 3 steps, asking what following him has cost, examining what you're focused on, and testing your assurance. Honestly, I began to see believers across the world who were recognizing and responding to the warnings. And what I saw gave me hope in the midst of all the devastation. But Jesus, I said, trying to process everything I was seeing, what if someone recognizes the warnings but doesn't know how to respond? What if they want to change but don't know where to start? And Jesus looked at me with this expression of both love and urgency, and he said something that would change how I understood preparation for the rapture. Jonathan, responding to these warnings is not complicated. It's just costly. The steps are simple: choose discomfort, eliminate distractions, pursue transformation. But each step requires giving up something you've been holding on to. The warning of comfort, he explained, requires giving up ease and choosing sacrifice. The warning of distraction requires giving up secondary passions and choosing singular focus. The warning of self-deception requires giving up false confidence and choosing honest examination. These are not complicated steps, but they are costly steps. So he showed me what this looked like practically. I watched as believers who recognized the warnings began to make specific, concrete changes in their lives. Those responding to the warning of comfort started making choices that cost them something. They gave sacrificially, even when it hurt financially. They served in ways that were inconvenient and uncomfortable. They spoke truth even when it cost them relationships. They chose the narrow path even when everyone around them was choosing the broad path. Those responding to the warning of distraction started ruthlessly eliminating things that were consuming their time and energy without preparing them for Christ's return. They deleted social media apps. They stopped watching news constantly. They quit engaging in political arguments. They redirected their passion from cultural battles to personal transformation. Those responding to the warning of self-deception started examining themselves with brutal honesty. They stopped relying on past prayers and started pursuing present relationship. They stopped measuring their readiness by religious activity and started looking for evidence of transformation. They stopped being satisfied with where they were and started pursuing where they needed to be. This is what responding to the warnings looks like, Jesus said. It's not complicated, but it is costly. It requires giving up comfort, giving up distractions, giving up false confidence. But for those willing to pay the cost, these warnings become the pathway to readiness. As the vision continued, Jesus showed me something that filled me with both hope and urgency. He showed me that there was still time to respond to the warnings, but that time was running out. Right now, he said, in this moment, any believer can recognize these warnings and respond to them. The warning of comfort is still active. You can still choose discomfort voluntarily. The warning of distraction is still active. You can still refocus on what matters. The warning of self-deception is still active. You can still examine yourself honestly and pursue genuine transformation. But, he continued, and his voice carried the weight of ultimate seriousness, these warnings are final. There will not be another opportunity after these. If you miss these warnings, if you remain comfortable, distracted, and self-deceived right up until the rapture, then you will not be ready. And missing readiness will cost you everything, not your salvation, but your place in the first resurrection. As the vision began to fade, Jesus spoke one final time, and his words would become the most important message I would ever share. Tell my people that these three warnings, comfort, distraction, and self-deception, are happening right now. Tell them that these are their final warnings, their last opportunity to prepare before the rapture occurs. Tell them that recognizing and responding to these warnings is not complicated, but it is costly. And tell them this, he concluded, his voice carrying both warning and hope. Missing even one of these warnings could cost them everything. But responding to all three of these warnings will prepare them for the rapture. The choice is theirs. The warnings are clear. The time is now. As his presence faded, I was left with a truth that was both devastating and liberating. The three final warnings before the rapture, comfort, distraction, and self-deception, are happening right now, in this moment, to every believer. And how we respond to these warnings will determine whether we're ready when Jesus returns.
Thank you so much for watching this message all the way to the end. We truly appreciate you being part of this community of faith. If this video encouraged, inspired, or challenged your heart in any way, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future messages. We'd also love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, favorite Bible verse, or prayer request in the comments below. Our community enjoys encouraging one another and praying together. May the Lord bless you, strengthen your faith, and fill your heart with his peace until we meet again in the next video. God bless you.
The warning of comfort is asking, what has following Jesus actually cost you? If the answer is nothing or very little, then you're living under the warning, and you need to deliberately choose discomfort, sacrifice, and the costly path of discipleship. The warning of distraction is asking, what are you actually focused on? If you're more passionate about politics, culture wars, or secondary issues than you are about your own transformation and relationship with Christ, then you're living under the warning, and you need to ruthlessly eliminate distractions and refocus on what actually matters. The warning of self-deception is asking, is there actual evidence of transformation in your life? If you're basing your assurance on past prayers, religious activity, or correct beliefs rather than on present evidence of becoming more like Christ, then you're living under the warning, and you need to examine yourself honestly and pursue genuine transformation. These are the three final warnings before the rapture. Missing even one of them could cost you everything, not your salvation, but your readiness. But responding to all three of them will prepare you for the most important event in human history. The warnings are clear. The time is now. The choice is yours. Are you comfortable when you should be choosing cost? Are you distracted when you should be focused? Are you self-deceived when you should be examining yourself honestly? These questions are not meant to condemn you. They're meant to wake you up to the warnings that are happening right now. in this moment, as your final opportunity to prepare. Don't miss the warnings. Don't wait until the rapture reveals that you weren't ready. Recognize the warnings now in your comfort, in your distractions, in your false confidence, and respond to them before it's too late. Because missing even one of these warnings could cost you everything.